we want to move forward to another critically important story, and that is the consequences of climate change, which have been, just very much in the forefront of many of our minds. Of course, the tragedy we saw in Texas and the floods that have also hit New Jersey as well. And we are very, very honored to be joined here by Aru Shiney-Ajay, who is the executive director of the Sunrise Movement, here to talk more about that. Aru, thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be on. Thank you.
Well, I want to actually just start with the issue of climate change because, of course, whenever these individual incidents happen, there's always a lot of an attempt to maybe, well, not always, but by many, to downplay the impact of climate change. So we've seen that with the floods in Central Texas in particular, that it's just sort of like, well, things just sort of happen. And obviously, there are people who are very invested in not linking this to climate change. So how much can we, if not this individual incident, but when we're seeing all this flooding and all these things, should we be linking it to the consequences of climate change?
We absolutely should. And I think something about climate science is that sometimes it can be hard to link every individual event. But if you look at it cumulatively, you see that over and over again, we see these once in 100 years, once in 1,000 year floods happening. Every few years, we see record-breaking heat waves, and that just ends up being exactly the effects of climate change that we would expect, like higher humidity, different, like increased rainfall. These are the effects of rising temperatures, of like changes in our global like seaflow patterns. This is all about the fact that we have polluted the climate for decades, and we are seeing the results of it.
And of course, okay, so this is the part of this broader pattern of these like super extreme weather events that are absolutely connected to climate change. And that's a huge part of the story. But another big part of it is this kind of failure to respond after the failure to like stop or try to like mitigate the worst effects of climate change. You also have federal climate agencies that are supposed to respond to disasters like this that have been gutted by now Trump and DOGE, but actually like previously in other ways as well. I mean, this is Texas we're talking about. So I guess what are the consequences of that kind of dismantling in moments like this?
I mean, I think you see the consequences. Right now, there are 134 people dead. I think dozens of those are children. This is a direct result of specifically, I would say, Trump's cuts to the National Weather Service. If you look at what happened, a lot of the cuts, a lot of the vacancies that were in the National Weather Service in the area were of the people who would usually be in charge of communicating with local officials. And those jobs were not there because of Trump's cuts. And the result of that is that the National Weather Service did issue a lot of warnings, did issue a lot of communications, but just had less capacity to be able to communicate with local officials about the risks of these floods. And the result of that is lives lost. It's just that simple. And when you scale it up, when you look at what FEMA is able to do, what NOAA is able to do, what the National Weather Service is able to do, this is only 6 months in. These effects are going to get worse and worse as both the climate crisis gets worse and worse, and as we start to see the repercussions of totally slashing and defunding these agencies.
The other issue I want to ask you about is sort of how it seems like we're just getting further and further behind the eight ball on addressing this. And in the context of the One Big Beautiful Bill, obviously one of the main things they were attacking were various programs around clean energy. I mean, I even saw in the context of some congressman was saying that part of the reason he was voting for it is they said they're going to find more things related to renewable and clean energy to cut in order to fund something he wanted. I forget exactly what it was. So obviously a big target. I mean, what's the real impact and the setback of those sorts of policies that are, I guess, now being enacted?
I think it's really dangerous. I mean, this bill is a lot of things. It's a waging war on working people in America. It's a giant handout to billionaires, and it's especially a handout to oil and gas billionaires in the oil and gas industry. And it also is the worst bill for climate that we have ever seen in American history. It totally slashes a lot of the progress that we made under the Biden administration, which was still far from where we needed to be, but was certainly strides forward. And it halts a lot of the renewable energy build out that's going to happen. It's going to kill around 800,000 green jobs. And all of that ends up in tangibly reducing our ability to curb emissions, right? And that is the central challenge of the climate movement right now. It's to bring down our emissions so that we can minimize the impact on our air, our water, our homes, this flooding, this fires that we see. If we don't curb our emissions, we're going to see more and more and more of them. So that is the impact that we're seeing. And certainly it increases the burden of what we're going to have to do if and when we have governing power again. It dramatically increases that. The other thing I'd say is that these are also just costs to everyday people. Like the amount of this is not, it's easy to make this feel like an abstract concept about emissions or carbon. What this is that your home is more likely to flood. Your home is more likely to burn down. You're less likely to be able to afford food in the future because food prices will rise. This is really about giving fossil fuel billionaires money and subsidies in exchange for raising our energy costs, like stopping us from shifting to clean energy and making our lives worse.
I guess this is maybe my theme for today's live stream, but I gotta ask, how would you assess the media coverage of all of this? Because everything you're saying is so important to highlight, right? The impact of climate change and causing these extreme weather events, as well as the complete corruption of government, the negligence, the deregulation, the role of the fossil fuel industry in setting policy that makes it impossible to respond or even mitigate climate change. How has the media been covering this? Have they been highlighting what's responsible, or is it kind of, whitewashing a lot of that and just kind of, saying it's a tragedy?
I certainly think there hasn't been enough coverage of the fact that this is not just a tragedy. It's both a result of climate change and a result of Trump's decisions. I think Trump and Abbott have tried very hard to try and depoliticize this as much as possible. And I think a lot of the media has allowed them to do that, or sort of has, engaged in their frame. I think that's really dangerous. Like what this is both a huge this is a huge cost of what Trump's actions are. And also, I think it's like a weakness of Trump's administration, that the fact that these things are going to keep happening. And if we keep letting him off the hook, then everyday people don't get to see how his decisions are actually affecting them. So I definitely think it's the responsibility of the media to articulate that, and to also articulate that this is not a question of like, do we have the money to respond? It's a question of what our priorities are as a society. Like FEMA's budget is, I think, around 30 billion. We spend quadruple that in subsidies to oil and gas. What we are choosing to spend money on reflects on what we care about as a society, and that is something that we can actually change.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to ask you a two-part question here, and leading in from the media, it's just making me think, for people who have Paramount Plus, they have this show Landman with Billy Bob Thornton, paid for by the American Petroleum Institute. But a big theme of a monologue in every single episode is that it's not actually possible to have enough renewable energy to like power our society. So I guess part one of my question is that even true? And I guess part two of that question is, given the sort of governmental dispensation right now, how important are mass movements in terms of how we can actually reach some of these goals?
Some of my favorite things to talk about. It's absolutely not true that renewable energy can't power our society. And I think if you look at the last few decades, what you see is that the fossil fuel industry has to come up with different lies every decade or so to try and delay progress. And at first, their number one lie was climate change isn't happening. And when the evidence for that started mounting up a lot, they switched to another lie, which is that it is about individual responsibility. Something not everyone knows is that British Petroleum actually invented the term carbon footprint in order to push responsibility onto individuals. So that was their next big propaganda campaign. And when that stopped working and people started pushing corporate responsibility, their new campaign is that it's too late and we can't do anything. And you can actually just see the eras of propaganda that they push. It changes its form, but it's always the same goal: to let them drill for oil and gas while screwing over the rest of us. So it's absolutely not true. Renewable energy absolutely can power us. They're trying to make it not by cutting renewable energy subsidies and making sure that we can't build renewable energy, but it could. It's growing really fast. It's cheap. It's affordable. It's more democratic than oil and gas are. It's better for consumers. So it's better in basically every way. But I think you're right. Like right now, the political situation that we're seeing is certainly not conducive to building out renewable energy. And I think that if you actually look at where people are, I think something like 94% of Americans support the federal government using its money to build out more solar panels. Like that is that's a huge percentage. There's enormous public support for this. And I think the job of mass movements is to be able to translate that passive public support into really active pressure that forces politicians to say that, okay, there's actually no other choice but to say yes to this. And that isn't going to happen by only talking about renewable energy. It's going to happen by talking about the wholesale reimagining of our society that we need to do. The reason people are voting for people like Trump is because they understand that society isn't working for them. They think Trump is a solution. And I think the responsibility of mass movements is to say, no, we can build something better. We can build a political and economic system that works for working people, where our homes can be safe for flooding, where instead of you having to pay for the impacts of your homes, impacts of climate disasters on your home, polluters have to pay. We can actually hold the billionaires responsible and also build a better world that works for all of us. I think that's what mass movements have to offer right now.
And that's super important to highlight. And I think for a lot of people, it just feels like such an insurmountable problem. Like, what can I do about it, right? Like, we're kind of told to just take shorter showers. But obviously, like, what has to happen is the movement building aspect of this. And there are people that are part of movements, but a lot of people don't know how to be. So I guess for all, to say, for people who are watching this horror unfold, what can they do right now? Or what can they get involved in, I guess, to support climate justice and try to fight back?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is like join an organization near you. Join Sunrise if you want to join Sunrise. It's sunrisemovement.org/join. It's that simple. Just type that in. You can find us on Instagram, on TikTok, on our website. It really does matter. At this point, we're already seeing the climate crisis hit our homes. The question of whether we can stop it and how we respond is going to be a question of how ordinary people choose to respond in this moment. So I know it's easy to feel like you can be powerless, like this problem is so big. The truth is that we have an incredible amount of power at our fingertips. And the fact that we are being told that nothing can be done is a lie of the fossil fuel industry, is something that they have deliberately pushed to be able to make money. So if you want to break out of that lie, join a movement, organize with people, whether it's organizing like direct aid in response to climate disasters, whether it's organizing protests at politicians or billionaires' houses, whether it's just helping your neighbors and talking to people and growing the movement and bringing people in. There's a role for everyone in this movement, and look us up and join us.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Well, I think the history of mass movements, they always say you can't do it, and the next thing you know, you have won. So we really appreciate you, really appreciate Sunrise and all the work you're doing. Aru Shiney-Ajay, the executive director of the Sunrise Movement, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.